Welcome back, everyone, or welcome for the first time to First Congregational Church. We are people along the way, learning, growing, and acting in faith. If you are joining First Congregational Church for the first time this week, we are so glad that you joined us in this, what seems to be an ongoing, unusual time that becomes usual in its own way. The bulletin is on the website at the bottom, about halfway down the homepage of the website at fccak.org. If you can bring that up or you can print it, there will also be parts of the service that will be broadcast on your screen during the service. So whenever there's a shared moment of unison prayer or reading that we can read together, it will be on your screen periodically. We do have a couple of announcements today. I know it's Kathy and Carl's birthday today. They have the same birthday, which is pretty incredible. We also have a significant amount of hair on the screens around. I'm telling you, this is about, I don't know, it feels like 8 weeks past due for me. So all of you wearing hats out there, we know what you're hiding. I know we had a couple things this last week that happened that were great around the church and a lot of fun. I did not make the game night this Friday, but apparently we played Farkle on Zoom on Friday, and people had a lot of fun. We're planning another one. I just heard people discussing maybe doing a Yahtzee version of that. On Friday night, I was actually digging a hole in the ground just outside of that wall where we're planting today. After sort of a staggered work of Crystal and myself and Jim and Emily Walker, the beds are almost completely installed for the Jerusalem artichokes up on the upper yard. And they produce like these potato-like tubers that, anyway, we'll see. It's a test. Happy Mother's Day to everyone as well. Your microphone was muted when the service began. During the prayer requests, if you would like to share something verbally, just let us know in the chat that you would like to be unmuted, and we can make sure that you can unmute your microphone. However, you can always, and you're encouraged to share any prayer concerns that you have in the chat just by typing, and I will read those aloud when we get to that point. Feel free to turn your camera on and off as you see fit. If you need to get up and move, or if you're in a space that you want to mute your camera, do that as whenever you'd like. Unfortunately, as I say every week, if you run into technical difficulties during the service, there's not a lot we can do. I won't be able to address each individual thing. We keep trying to work the kinks out of Zoom. I think we're maxing out the capability of sound and video of what Zoom can do and record. So anyway, hopefully this week is good. If your computer or device just isn't working, or if your internet for whatever reason today is slow, you can always join by telephone. You can see the number to do that either on the daily update from Friday or on the bulletin, which is on the website. Which reminds me, make sure and check announcements in the bulletin. The daily update this last Friday had a lot of stuff. There's the newsletter came out this last week, which has some important articles that have good information about some things that are happening. We also have an announcement coming up that we're still planning on right now, June sometime. I don't remember what Jim said, but in the middle of June, we'll be planning the annual trip to Walton Island, and you can check out Jim's new cabin, which I think is completely done at this point. So that's still going. It's still planned for right now. Obviously, everything is planned right now, and then tomorrow takes care of itself. After the service today, we don't have any meetings, so I will plan to do a random split into different breakout rooms. So if you'd like to stay and chat with someone or with some people, a few minutes after the service, I will just sort of randomly put groups of roughly like 4 to 6. And you are free to wait around and join those, or you can leave after the service whenever you would like. All right, now let our service continue. Ever gracious way-making God, we celebrate the gifts of your Spirit. You have not led us this far to shrink in fear, but built your body gathered to be full of your truth. You have made us strong and faithful servants of Christ. You call us to take up the mantle of justice and to follow wherever faith leads us. You fill us with strength and hope, and you invite us to share in the cost and joys of discipleship. You promise us splendor and beauty in this life and in the world to come. Meet us here, we pray, that your word will be fulfilled in our hearing and that your Spirit will fill us with courage. Amen. So to continue on with our series of musical offerings today, some members of the handbell choir and Kathy Means on cello are going to play a song for us. My shepherd will supply my need. Thanks, everyone, for sharing that. Thanks, for getting that organized. I know there's a lot of these sort of plannings that are happening that I don't even see until they show up in my email, which is great. I know Lori and Caroline are figuring out all sorts of ways to get people to share music together. So for the children's message today, I want to talk about something very practical. And I know I mentioned it, and it might be in the daily update at some point. But we installed the planter beds, the accessible planter beds, in the lower parking lot of the church along the sidewalk. And we did that about a week ago, maybe a week and a half ago. And we've been talking about who wants to use that space. And I think we have about 3 to 5 of the 16 open spots claimed right now. So if you're interested in claiming a 3-foot by 3-foot section of the planter beds, let the office know. But there's one of the planter beds, which is a 12-foot section, that Life and Learning and the youth are going to do something with. Now this is where we don't have a good idea completely what that's going to look like. There's going to be some testing, and people can grow whatever you want to see. So this week, I don't know how much people are able to get out and drive a little bit, but if you're at home this week, which I'm guessing most of us are, and your parent is also home this week and has some free time, you should bother them to drive to the lower church parking lot, to look at one of them, to think about what kind of a plant that you want to see there. So we're growing all sorts of things. Sometimes people are growing flowers that they just don't have space for at home. Sometimes I think a few people are going to grow food in those planters as well that we can harvest later. It's really pretty endless of what those beds can do. So as we sort of like shift into like continually stepping into what edible landscaping looks like at the church, there's going to be more and more need for ideas about what we want to do. If we want to make our space less manicured lawn and more plants and food oriented, that's going to take a lot of imagination and a lot of ideas. So to some extent, these planter boxes are a way of testing those ideas on a smaller scale even, see what works. So that's my sort of homework for this week. Did we get some report back from kids who see the beds and want to try something? God, for our ongoing work as best we can, following your Spirit, trying to create our world in a way that is after your way. It looks to grow life in new ways and imagine food in new ways, so that maybe fewer people are hungry, and maybe we spend some more time outside with our fingers in the soil. And may we know who you are more by the things that we do and the care that we give. Amen. As with our ongoing theme of giving during quarantine, you are welcome to share your pledge or your offering by mailing in a check, or you can come by and drop it in the mail slot at the church as well. Or you can go to the website, and at the top right corner there's a button that says Give, and you can give a one-time or a recurring pledge or donation there. But we're for the fact that we are not seeing one another, this congregation is doing exceptionally well. People are staying connected. People are still participating in all sorts of things, sometimes participating in ways that they didn't before. So I'm not worried at all about the future of First Congregational Church. This is just one more piece of our history that will guide us in the days to come. For an update, though, to the Congregational Support Fund, we are receiving those checks now, and we'll start to get reports about what that looks like and start taking in ideas about who you know that might need help. In the coming months, it's hard to say what people's job situations will be, those sorts of things. So if you know, or if you are dealing with financial hardship due to our current the pandemic and loss of employment and things like that, please let me know. And also, if you would still like to share some of the stimulus check that you received, you can send those to the office and just write in Congregational Support Fund in the memo line. Or you can do that on the website as well. So, thanks, everybody. If you would please join me for our dedication of gifts. Good Shepherd of the sheep, you have opened the door to new life for us through your dedication and your sacrifice. May we reflect your love for us by opening the doors of our hearts to you and your church and the act of giving our tithes and offerings. Amen. Spirit of God, rest in this place, surrounding your people. In our silence, open us to the ways of Christ living among us. The prophet Isaiah said, "As a mother comforts her child, so I will comfort you." Mothering God, we cherish your great love for us. As Creator, you made us in your image and called life from the earth and the water. In baptism, we are born anew from water and spirit, and your love and care are made known to us as we grow in faith. We give you thanks for those who have been mothers and stepmothers in our lives, for grandmothers and aunts, and all those who have been like mothers to us, who have shown us your comfort and courage, peace and strength. God of peace, we acknowledge that this day was originally created for mothers grieving the loss of their children in war. We grieve with all those who have lost a child, who have struggled with fertility issues, who have to give up children in foster care and adoption. May your love surround us and hold us. Loving God, we hold tenderly to the ones who have difficult relationships with their mothers, for those who have separated in relationship. We weep for those who are missing their mothers. And in these difficult times, O God, we know the distance that separates us, the physical distance for safety, the distance of time for those gone, the distance of fading memories. We know the distance of estrangement. We pray for healing wherever possible, O God, for forgiveness wherever possible, and for the hope that you bring in our lives. Hold us, loving parent, in your healing hands on this day, in the name of the one who taught us to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. For our first hymn, we'll sing "Faith While Trees Are Still in Bloom." Scripture reading today is the first in a series that will sort of start. So this one will be a little bit left on a cliffhanger. It's from Judges chapter 8. Then the Israelites said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you and your son, and then your grandson, because you've rescued us from Midian's power." And Gideon replied to them, "I'm not the one who will rule over you, and my son won't rule over you either. The Lord rules over you." But Gideon said to them, "May I make one request of you? Everyone give me the earrings from their loot." The Midianites had worn gold earrings because they were Ishmaelites. "We'll gladly give them," they replied. And they spread out a piece of cloth, and everyone pitched in the earrings from their loot. The weight of the gold earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, not counting the crescents, the pendants, and the purple robes worn by the Midianite kings, or the collars that were on their camels' necks. Gideon fashioned a priestly vest out of it and put it in his hometown of Ophrah. All Israel became unfaithful there because of it, and it became a trap for Gideon and his household. So Midian was brought down before the Israelites and no longer raised its head. The land was peaceful for 40 years during Gideon's time. Jerubbaal, Joash's son, went home to live with his own household. Gideon had 70 sons of his own because he had many wives. And his secondary wife, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son, and he named him Abimelech. And Gideon, Joash's son, died at a good old age and was buried in the tomb of his father Joash in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. Right after Gideon died, the Israelites once again acted unfaithfully by worshiping the Baals, setting up Baal-berith as their god. The people of Israel didn't remember the Lord their God, who had delivered them from the power of all their enemies on every side. Nor did they act loyally towards the household of Jerubbaal, that is, Gideon, in return for all the good he had done on Israel's behalf. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. Knowing and doing are not the same thing. We know this. Gideon was firm in his resolve not to seek control. He refused to be king, but as for the spoils of victory, a small earring couldn't hurt. See, I doubt very much that Gideon thought that the vestments that he created would cause such a problem. I mean, it's just vestments. Most of the time, it seems the biggest problems come out of nowhere, when you least expect them. They sneak up on us, and only afterwards do we see it coming. See, today we read Gideon. Next week is Youth Sunday, and we'll share readings. The youth will share readings, and Marcy will share a sermon on the theme of wisdom, which has been their theme for the last week. So you're definitely going to want to be here next week. It's going to be fun. You never quite know how Zoom is going to work out when you're switching between cameras, and it's going to be fun, trust me. And the following week after that, we continue on after Gideon to his sons. There's no way that Gideon could have guessed what would happen next. And I'm not going to tell you. You can read ahead if you'd like. You never seem to see the biggest stuff coming. And then it overwhelms. Or perhaps, and this is where I'm going to go today, you don't see the really bad stuff coming because generally it was always there, just lying under the surface, waiting for the right moment. See, last Tuesday was a great concluding section of the second series of the Remembering 400 classes we've been doing on Tuesday nights. Session 3 starts on the 19th of May, not this Tuesday, but the next. And in this last series, we discussed the leading up to the formation of the National Association of Congregational Christian Churches in 1954. And especially this last week, we focused very much so in the 20th century and in the 30s and 50s. The NACCC is the National Association of Churches that we are a part of. And we talked a little bit about the Congregational magazine called Social Action, which I have read and researched pretty extensively, and which began in 1935, began publishing in 1935. And I was reminded during our discussion on Tuesday of the very first issue from 1935 and their very first article of the very first edition. And it spoke a reminding word into an act of violence that has long been with us. See, following the sort of introductory articles of a very first episode, there are sharing accolades with everyone who made this day possible, that sort of thing. The very first column of the first volume of Social Action in March of 1935 was an article entitled CSA Joins Drive to End Lynching. And there was a bill introduced into the U.S. Senate called the Costigan-Wagner Anti-Lynching Bill, S-24. And the problem being addressed in 1935, and it had been going on for a while, was the practice of officers and employees of the state giving in to mobs of citizens attempting to apprehend African Americans in custody in order to lynch them for accused crimes. And the problem was there was rarely recourse or justice of any kind for those killed by this kind of lynching. And this bill was an attempt to have federal authorities step in if necessary, if state and local officials would not. However, there was also a very strong opposition. And the first article states that a well-informed person's report that unless popular demand for this measure is greatly increased, its enactment into law is not to be expected. The bill would have required punishment or legal action for any officer or employee who fails to protect a prisoner against injury or death at the hands of a mob, or who fails to be diligent in apprehending or prosecuting lynchers. There was also a provision that would have instructed federal prosecutors to act if state officials would not, and the penalties for the county in which it happened would occur. See, the CSA, in spite of some noted shortcomings in the bill's scope, endorsed it publicly and gave action steps for individuals and congregations to act and support. And there was an update in the May 1935 edition, a couple months later, stating that the Costigan-Wagner bill was out of committee and that it would be before the entire Senate shortly. But they also claimed that there were certain senators who threatened to defeat it by filibuster. And it was eventually filibustered for 5 days by a group of senators who opposed it. And the publication, Social Action, quotes one of the opponents as referring to the anti-lynching bill as a revolutionary bill. This bill destructive of states' rights, this bill which would destroy existing peaceable race relations. And as might be expected or suspected, support for the bill followed pretty strict regional lines in the country. It's also a difficult stretch to imagine lynchings as part of any peaceable race relations. The bill eventually found its way to the end of the legislative calendar, but ultimately did not pass. And the following year, as stated by the magazine, after the bill was not passed the year before, it was brought back in front of Congress in 1936. And President Roosevelt refused to speak out in favor of the bill. He argued that the white voters in the South would never forgive him if he supported the bill, and he would therefore lose the next election. And the magazine in 1936 published a handwritten letter that a black family received from their neighbor when they built a house next to a white family. And in the letter, the threatening letter, it made reference to their son, what the letter called a mannish boy of the family, and threatened death because the writer claimed that African Americans were getting too rich and claimed that they needed to know their place. And the article ended with the plea for churches to support the bill once again. Unfortunately, the boy mentioned in the letter was later lynched. See, Social Action reported that in 1935 alone, 18 African Americans were lynched by mobs of people with little to no response by state and local officials, and that there were some 66 victims of such mob lynching since 1926 that were officially recorded. And strangely enough, nearly 200 anti-lynching bills have been considered by Congress. The first formal bill was presented in 1918. A federal lynching bill finally became law in 2018. I don't know what happened before Ahmaud Arbery was murdered by the father and son McMichaels in February. It makes no difference. I mean, he was murdered because he wouldn't freeze when armed men trapped him with vehicles and demanded him to stop. If you're not familiar with what happened, on February 23rd of this year, Ahmaud Arbery was jogging in a Georgia neighborhood which he jogged in regularly. As Ahmaud was making his way down a street during his run, the father, McMichael, was in his front yard at his home, and he spotted Ahmaud and claims that he was responsible for a recent robbery, or was looking around a new home construction site, or was just running in their neighborhood. See, public records, as far as I know, show no police records of robberies for at least 2 months before this in that neighborhood. And so McMichaels went inside and got his son a handgun and a shotgun and drove after Ahmaud. They caught him off with their truck, and an unknown third friend closed in from the other direction. And after the McMichaels demanded he stop at gunpoint, a cell phone video shows the son McMichaels approach Ahmaud with the shotgun. And after a short struggle, Ahmaud is shot 3 times and collapses as he runs away. See, there are many words to describe what happened, but to me, it appears to be a lynching, or at least the child of lynching. There may not have been a formal mob show up to a jail, and Ahmaud was not in any way in custody on suspicion of a crime. But lynching was never about crime or guilt or anything other than a deadly statement that we can do whatever we want with you, so hold still and take it. See, the fact that 2 people felt that they had the right to hold another person at gunpoint just because they thought his skin color matched some supposed crime is what makes this a child of lynching. The reality that these 2 white men had no doubt that they owned the movement of this black man in their neighborhood is a direct representation of how white supremacy takes the lives of people of color every day. But just as troubling, and why it all begins to smell more and more like the coordinated lynchings from 1935, is that 3 local prosecutors refused to take the case because they knew the McMichaels' father personally, and nobody seemed to think it was prosecutable in the first place. It took over 2 months before a prosecutor would even accept the case, and only after the cell phone video became public and was leaked by a friend of the McMichaels, and the Georgia Bureau of Investigations took over. You see, people knew what happened almost immediately, or at least the McMichaels version. And that was good enough until public pressure arose after the video became public. It was a lynching without a mob, an accusation and execution without a second question. As American as apple pie, they say. But that's not where this all ends. I'm not saying this to impose guilt on anyone as if you or I wanted this to happen or let this particular murder happen. See, I don't believe that guilt is an effective motivator for any sort of meaningful change. I don't think that religious guilt brings people to Jesus either. People seeing Jesus in us and what we do brings people to Jesus. Fullness of life is contagious. Guilt is isolating. See, that's what I mean when I say that we are people of resurrection. We are striving to be living proof of who Jesus was and is. It is not guilt that has animated the body of Christ for 2,000 years, but the hope that the realm of God can actually be made real. It is people living into that hope that make the resurrection real every day. But I don't see our public responses to public murders and lynchings today as all that different than it was 100 years ago. It keeps happening, and strikingly little changes. We have more video evidence, but that doesn't seem to stop the unfiltered violence of it. See, if people would have just left well enough alone after Jesus was executed, that would have been it. But they didn't. Jesus' followers kept saying his name, and in their own suffering and trials claimed his name as their own. How we live in response to today tells people who we are and who we follow. People will know we are Christians by the way that we live. And how we live in response to the open and blatantly racist murder of people like Ahmaud Arbery, knowing that the lives and freedom of black women and men have always been up for discussion in this country, will tell people who we are and what we value. And we are silent, I think, at least me, mostly because it makes us uncomfortable and we don't want to know what to do. I mean, perhaps that's all there is to it. I mean, I don't have a checklist of things to do to fix white supremacy, what it has wrought for centuries. There are a million things to do and nothing to do. It is so woven into the fabric of who we are that it can feel as if everything we know will unravel. What I do know is that for those of us raised and taught under white supremacy's careful and watchful eye, finding our way toward anything else will probably not feel good. That kind of healing and resurrection does not feel good for everyone. And there will be more than enough excuses to explain away the depth of it all around us and within us. But I still know is that how we respond, whether we respond with consenting silence or resolute defiance of this ongoing violence, people will know the God we follow by how we live, not simply by what we do in response today. Guilt will not fix this problem. Defiant and persistent hope will. What we can do as Christians to claim this defiant hope is to begin by saying his name and proclaiming that, like Jesus, Ahmaud Arbery is a holy child of God, murdered for the sins of we the people. And his blood cries out from the soil of Georgia for the resurrection of peaceableness, full of justice, just as the blood of Jesus cried out from a hill outside Jerusalem, and still cries out every time we share communion. We say Ahmaud's name for our own salvation as Americans. And then we live in such a way as to reclaim Ahmaud's death. Another life taken, but not lost or forgotten. And we step boldly into a future that refuses to settle for less than the resurrection of life where once death claimed the day. It is this way we choose to go. We can choose which way we will go, We already choose all the time which way we will go. We must choose again today whether we will follow the way of the executed and risen Christ, proclaiming the realm of God found in the rising from the grip of death, or just say it was too hard in the first place. We can choose now. We can decide today that the way of Jesus is more powerful than the ways of death that present themselves all around us and that are found even deep within us. We choose the resurrection of life this day and forevermore. Amen. Please join me for our closing hymn, We Are Not Our Own. There are so many big and overwhelming things happening right now. But I know that the Church of Jesus is made for these days. It was formed out of difficulty and it has survived through all sorts of difficulties, sometimes self-inflicted, sometimes externally. The church has dealt with questions for thousands of years about who we are and how we choose to be followers of Jesus. And we must continually choose the hard way, the good way, the way of Christ. Go in peace.